This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Today's show starts with Dennis McKinney, director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, with information about programs with FSA and upcoming deadlines. K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster continues the show by discussing a few of her World of Weed articles. She talks about toothed spurge, eastern redcedar, and mistletoe. The Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts completes the show as Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, and Jason Warner share knowledge on liver abscesses and if cow-calf producers should be worried about it. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with an update from the Kansas Farm Service Agency. And this week, we're joined by the Director of Kansas FSA, Dennis McKinney. Dennis, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Dennis, kicking off our conversation today, talking that county committee elections are taking place.
That's right. For your county committee elections, the ballots are due December 4th, so get those into the office. We are the only federal agency I'm aware of that's allowed to have county committees at the local level to help us administer our programs. It's a huge advantage because they can bring reality to a program full of regulations written for a nationwide application. They can help us apply those in practical ways and smart ways at the local level. So please participate and get your ballots in by December 4th.
And are those paper ballots they're mailing back to the office, or how's that taking place?
Mail them, or you can drop them off at the office. They'll go into a lockbox there, and they're counted by independent folks when they count the ballots.
And something taking place also really important to agriculture is the Farm Bill and some things around that.
The Farm Bill was extended for a year. The 2018 Farm Bill was extended for a year by the continuing resolution that extended our funding to January 12th. And as a result, we do expect to have an announcement for CRP signups later this winter. That would typically be a part of the Farm Bill. Also, get your acreage certified by December 15th. And we also encourage people, your wheat acreage, your fall planted crop acreage has to be turned in by December 15th. Please do everything you can. You know, your perennials like alfalfa, your grass, your CRP. Go ahead and get everything certified you can by then. And it makes your workload and our workload work better. We have some people who have grass that never certify it until there's an LFP claim and a drought. And that means we have to go back and start from scratch on all that. Just makes life a lot easier for our folks. If just certify all the acres you can December 15th, and that'll be out of the way, and will be easier meeting our March 15th deadline.
So how do producers go about certifying that land?
Get your acres. The folks at the county office will help you with your maps. Get your acres and get that turned in, and they'll get that certified on a 578 form for you. Then you can turn that over to your crop insurance agents so you can have the same acres on your crop insurance policy.
So it sounds like just spending a good time with your local FSA office and getting things lined out then?
Yeah, we have a great team out there. They like to take care of those farmers and ranchers and help them get the job done.
Something else taking place at the Farm Service Agency, ARC and PLC, which could possibly be impacted by the Farm Bill.
Right, with the Farm Bill extension, you will have a chance to change your ARC PLC election every year. We're not sure. We don't have an announcement yet on when that starts, but by the bill, the deadline will be March 15th. So be thinking about what you want to do because that election will have to be made in our office by March 15th, whether you want to put your land into the ARC program or the PLC program this year.
And Dennis, as we're talking about ARC and PLC, could you give us a quick reminder about what are ARC and PLC?
Well, the ARC program takes into account conditions across the county, and did you have a drought? Were there major production losses? And so you can get a payment there if there were production losses because of weather. And the payment then comes about a year later. If you're under PLC, that's price loss coverage, it takes into account whether there was just a major drop in prices, crop prices for that year, and that payment would come sooner, but it's based on crop prices rather than overall conditions of price and weather.
Dennis also wanting to mention to producers that the Farm Service Agency is currently in the middle of ERP2.
That's right, ERP2, we're in full swing. For Track 1, you probably got your application already in the mail. If you didn't, call the FSA office. Those are pre-filled forms using data from the Risk Management Agency based on crop losses that you had in 2022. The previous ERP programs did not have as big an impact on Kansas because they're based on 2020 and 2021. 2022 was a big drought year in Kansas, and so this will have a much bigger impact on Kansas. So you get those pre-filled forms with your RMA data. It makes it a lot faster for us, makes it faster, easier for the producer to sign that, get it turned in, and we can try to get it processed for you. Software is on hold for a few days. I guess we had some folks in other states going back and trying to retroactively change ownerships. That can't be done. It'll be based on how your crops were signed up in 2022. Can't go back and give your wife a bigger share or a spouse a bigger share, anything like that. That should get to going again. But get those turned in. We think we can process those fairly quickly. Track 2 is will be there to help people who did not have insured crops or who had shallow losses among several crops. It will be there. It will take a little more time to fill that out. You'll have to look at your accounting data to compare 2022 to a prior year, a base year. But it will be there as well, and it could be quite valuable to some of our producers in helping them manage that risk. Again, as I've said before, we do not want to remove all risk because then capitalist markets won't work right. But we realize in agriculture, we face a huge amount of risk from both weather and prices, changing commodity prices, worldwide conditions. So we try to help producers manage that risk so we keep a good, strong system of family farmers in place across the United States.
Dennis, so this isn't looking at 2023 numbers, but really looking at 2022 numbers then?
Yes, this what we're doing now is based on 2022 losses.
And as we enter the holiday season, encouraging producers to get some paperwork done before Christmas time.
Right. I would stress on the Economic Relief Program, ERP, the estimate by economists was that there were about $11.7 billion in uninsured losses in agriculture, 2022. Congress appropriated about $3.3 billion. I've had a few calls because the program has reduction factors in place to reduce those payments to fit the budget. I've had calls from several producers that said, hey, we thought we were going to get X number of dollars when we went through the paperwork, but it only came out to be Y, which is about 35% of what we expected. That's because we have to fit the program to the appropriated dollars. It's still a quite valuable program to Kansas producers, but just be sure to read through the whole application because the payment you think you might get when you first start the application isn't nearly as what the payment that you actually get won't be as high as what your expectations maybe were. I've just put that warning out there because I've had a few calls already.
Our producers then also need to get their applications done for LFP and ELAP.
Right. That's right. We had the areas affected by drought, particularly the grass, the pastures, for livestock forage program and the emergency livestock assistance program. We still have quite a few of those applications that are out. Please get those finished up and get them into our folks. The deadline is in January. We're asking them, go ahead and get those in by Christmas if you can. Take care of your local FSA technician, and they'll be a lot happier with you. It makes life easier for all of us. But, yeah, we do need to get those finished up and turned in.
And talking about different programs from the Farm Service Agency, climate smart programs you wanted to mention to producers.
You know, I'd also mention that on our farm loan programs, we have some really good programs out there now. A lot of land trade changes hands this time of year. Don't assume you're not eligible. Come talk to our FSA farm loan program folks and see what they have to offer. We really want to help those younger families get started with a sound footing. As we look at some of the programs we're offering now in USDA, we cooperate with the Farm Service Agency. We cooperate with the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Risk Management Agency. Our side of USDA is called Farm Production and Conservation. We cooperate on a lot of things that are going under the heading climate smart, but they're common sense things. A lot of controversy out there now. Is it really global warming? Is it man-made or is it natural? Does spending money on it really do any good? Let me just ask you, set all that aside for just a little bit. What we are focused on are basic things we've learned well the last 90 years. If we keep topsoil in place where it belongs, we know that's a good thing. If we can sequester more carbon into the soil and raise organic matter content, we know that's a good thing. Financial planning expert said one time, if you can increase your organic matter content in your soil by 0.5%, that's a wonderful legacy to leave to your children. So set aside all the political controversy we hear these days. What we are focused on in our side of USDA, keeping the topsoil in place, increasing organic matter content, we know those are good things to do, and we want to work with you to do it. And again, as you've heard me say before, we have the privilege of working with the world's best farmers and ranchers to improve habitat, to conserve our soil, and to create the safest, most abundant food supply in the world.
And Dennis, just a quick reminder once again about a farm loan discrimination program.
That's right. Under IRA Section 2207, there's a program for those who think they may have been discriminated against in the past. We don't run it, but we can help you get in touch with the people who do. It's a sizable application. It's not just, I'm going to file this to get easy money. You have to show some information. But if you we urge you to get the application and fill it out because we do want to correct that wrong.
Where can people then find out more information from the Farm Service Agency or about the Farm Loan Discrimination Program?
If you go to Farmers.gov, lots of information there on what we're doing. You usually can find it. It's pretty well organized. Even the old guys like me can kind of navigate through it. Or the best way is always call your local Farm Service Agency office. They're more than happy to help you out.
And so as we're encouraging people to maybe get their applications done before the holiday season and maybe visit that local FSA office, when will those offices actually be closed during the holiday season?
Well, of course, we'll be closed Christmas. People thought we were closed. We were actually open the day after Thanksgiving. We'll be open every business day through the whole holiday season. We'll have our doors open. Typically, our office hours are 8 to 4:30. I know for a fact most of those offices, you call them before 8, they're going to answer the phone.
Sounds like a lot of great opportunities to come see their local FSA office.
Great opportunities. We have wonderful staff. I'm proud of them, and their commitment to public service is a strong commitment.
Dennis, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our FSA update.
Thank you.
That was Director of the Kansas Farm Service Agency, Dennis McKinney. If you'd like to find out more information about the Discrimination Financial Assistance Program from Section 22007 of the Inflation Reduction Act, you can do so by going to 22007apply.gov. Just a reminder that application deadline has been extended to January 13th, 2024. If you're looking to find out more information from the Farm Service Agency, you can do that by going to www.farmers.gov. If you're wanting to find your local service center, simply go to Farmers.gov and in the upper right-hand corner, click on Service Centers. I will put links to all this in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Kansas State University weed specialist Sarah Lancaster as she talks about a few of her World of Weed articles on tooth spurge, eastern redcedar, and mistletoe. We're cutting to that short break now. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing a series in Agronomy e-Update articles called World of Weeds. And so we're going to talk about a few of those weeds today. And then to talk about them, we're joined by K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Shelby.
And Sarah, kicking off our conversation with the World of Weed article talking about tooth spurge. And so what is tooth spurge?
So tooth spurge is a plant that is found all across the state of Kansas. As the name implies, it's in the spurge family. So we have tooth spurge that we're going to talk about today, but other folks might be familiar with spotted spurge or maybe prostrate spurge. Prostrate spurge is the one we oftentimes see growing in the sidewalks that grows real flat across the ground. So if you see that weed and you're a weed nerd like me, you can amaze your friends by breaking off a piece of the stem, and you'll have this little milky sap that comes out. Right, and that's a characteristic of the spurge family, is that milky sap. So tooth spurge, the plant we'll talk about today, has that. Also, our favorite, we're approaching the holiday season, right? So poinsettias are in the spurge family, and they'll have that as well. So that sap it can actually be like an irritant and a little, I won't say poisonous, but it can be, I shouldn't say poisonous, I should say toxic, because if it bites you, it's poisonous. If you bite it, it's toxic. So that sap can be a little toxic and cause skin irritation, eye irritation, things like that, right? Which is why we always get the big message about don't let your kids or your cats eat the poinsettias, right?
And so how do people go about identifying these? Does it look like your common Christmas poinsettia?
So, in fact, tooth spurge is going to look a little bit like a poinsettia that forgot to change colors. So if you look at the top of the plant, it has really inconspicuous flowers that are really not very noticeable at all. They're kind of a lime greenish color, and they look like like the inside of a jingle bell or something, sitting on top of the plant. And then there'll be a cluster of what looks like leaves around those. Those are actually bracts, so those are actually parts of the flower. In most flowering plants, those bracts are smaller, and their main function is to kind of protect the floral structures, the important floral structures for making seeds, right? But in plants like tooth spurge and poinsettia, those bracts become conspicuous, and that's what actually changes colors in our poinsettias is the bracts.
And so are there concerns with this weed?
So this weed is not easily controlled with glyphosate. And so where we see problems with this weeds are places where we rely on glyphosate for weed control. I got a call this spring. Somebody wanting to know how to control it in a stubble field. So I know that that was in sort of western Kansas. And then I had some pictures sent to me here this fall at harvest time of these really strange looking seed pods. What in the world is this plant? What plant do these come from? And it was tooth spurge. So it had done well in this particular field over the summer, and they were finding lots of the seeds in the field.
Is there an ability for producers to control it?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, glyphosate's not great, but you can use products like atrazine or metribuzin. So atrazine in our corn and sorghum programs, metribuzin in our soybean programs. Valor is also effective on this weed. So in a fallow system, folks might want to look at dicamba for control. So there are some options there. It's just not, we rely so much on glyphosate in the group 15s, and it's not very well controlled by those.
Another world of weed for us that we're going to talk about today is the eastern red cedar, as we're kind of entering into the holiday season. And so can you tell us a little bit about the eastern red cedar?
Yeah, so when I put together this eastern red cedar article, I actually worked pretty closely with Dr. Fick, right? Walt Fick is one of our range ecologists, and he's a darn good weed manager in terms of rangeland weed management. And so when we think about eastern red cedar as a weed, that's where we think of it, is generally in pasture and rangeland.
Sarah, why might this be a concern for people?
So eastern red cedar, it's a native plant, but it's one of those rare native plants that can become almost invasive, Shelby. It's one of the main species that we think about in terms of woody encroachment on our rangelands. It makes a great shelter belt tree, right? It can form dense thickets and block the wind. I know lots of guys who love to have a cedar thicket for their mama cows over the winter, right? They can make a great wind block, but they can also escape and just grow randomly. One thing about cedar trees that is kind of interesting and that can affect management is that they're a dioecious plant species. Yes, so Shelby, you're looking at me like I'm speaking another language. A plant that is dioecious is a species that has male plants and female plants. And so the plants that make the little blue berries that the birds eat and drop the seeds all over the place, those are the females. The ones that turn that lovely orange color when spring and everybody's sneezing and has a headache, those are the males. So you have to have both in order to get seed production. And so, there's some thoughts about, can we utilize that dioecious nature to try to only use, for example, males in shelter belts and things of that nature so that we don't have as much seed production.
So is there really a good control method, or just the continued fires, what often hears for woody encroachment?
So fire is an option. Sometimes you get larger trees, right? For example, if you're taking over management of a property that hasn't been maintained well, if you get those larger trees, sometimes a cut stump treatment is a good idea. So things like Grazon or Tordon can be effective for that. But that is pretty time consuming, right? And so another option would be to go in and cut the trees and then try to manage regrowth.
And so, Sarah, as our last weed for us to talk about from the world of weeds is the mistletoe.
Yeah, so, every once in a while we need to do something just for fun, right, Shelby? So mistletoe is totally in that category. Not a weed of agronomic importance, but is a curiosity, right? And one that has a lot of, folklore and tradition around it as we approach the holiday season. So we went from Christmas trees to mistletoe. So mistletoe, one of the things that makes it unique is that it's a parasitic plant, and so it can only survive with a host. And so those hosts are trees. So some of the tree species you might find it in would be fir trees, oak trees, pecan trees, walnut trees. Okay? So not going to find mistletoe in central and western Kansas. Really, we're looking for oak trees here in the eastern part of the state is where you might be likely to find mistletoe.
Does the mistletoe look like the stereotypical mistletoe you see around the holidays?
Pretty much, yeah. It's a kind of a vining plant with the little berries. The flowers, not very conspicuous, right? So think about the flowers that we see in the plastic mistletoe that we hang out. They're not very big. The berries, again, do make good bird food, right? And so that's one of the ways that it spreads. If you want, you can grow mistletoe commercially, right? There are folks who actually do that if you want to have live mistletoe at your Christmas party this year. The other thing that I thought was interesting when I put this article together is that mistletoe berries are toxic to people, right? But many moons ago, I took a toxicology class, and one of the first things that we had to memorize in that class was the phrase, the dose makes the poison. And that phrase is, I don't know, one of the smart dead guys back in like the Roman Empire, right? I don't remember. Pericles? I don't remember which one. But this idea applies to mistletoe because there's actually lots of folks who are researching mistletoe as a cancer treatment. So totally a case of, a weed is just a plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered, to quote Emerson.
So is this something that producers or people who have this on their trees really need to control?
It can be damaging to your trees, right? It's a parasite. Just like you would take care of parasites in your cattle herd, you should take care of parasitic plants in your tree stand. And so, yeah, you can do that. You can either go in and just remove the branches that have the mistletoe on them. There's also some evidence that says that Garlon, Roundup, or 2,4-D can help to control mistletoe when it gets into your trees.
Unlike tooth spurge, you really don't need to go walk around every tree because it's probably not going to take out your trees.
It's probably not going to be something that, decimates a fence row or a wooded area overnight. You'll see it. You'll notice it. It'll be an oddity. And over time, it'll probably weaken that tree that it's affected.
Sarah, if people do have questions about other weeds, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah, so for folks across the state, the best first contact for any of our specialists is always their county or district ag agent. So we have a great group of folks across the state that are more than happy to help our clients. And then if they don't know what it is, they'll call me. And probably, it'll be a three-way conversation then at that point. But folks are also welcome to reach out to me via my email address, which is slancaster@ksu.edu.
Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us about a few of the weeds in your World of Weeds series.
Thanks for the opportunity, Shelby.
That was Kansas State University weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. I will link her World of Weed articles about tooth spurge, eastern red cedar, and mistletoe in today's show notes on agtoday.net. If you'd like to find them on your own, you can do so by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. And while you're there, you can sign up for their weekly agronomy e-update articles. If you do have questions about weeds, contact your local extension office, but I'll also put Sarah's email in today's show notes, which is slancaster@ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be joined by the Beef Cattle Institute for this week's Ask the Experts. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today for another segment of BCI's Ask the Experts.
Hi, welcome to Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts. I'm Brad White, joined by two good experts today, Dr. Phillip Lancaster.
Hello, guys.
And Dr. Jason Warner.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
So we're happy to have you with us because we've got a good question. And I want to pose this to you guys and get your answers. And as you answer, you'll get up to 10 points. So this question from a listener is, I've heard a lot about liver abscesses. Are they important to me and my cow-calf operation? Jason, I'm going to start with you first.
So when we talk about liver abscesses, I think in the traditional discussion or the sense of, being something that we see primarily during the finishing phase of the beef production cycle or period, when we think about their relationship to cow-calf production, generally speaking, no, it's not something that's going to have a direct implication on that cow-calf operation. But certainly if a producer is retaining ownership on a set of calves throughout the finishing period, certainly liver abscesses are important and something that we've got to be cognizant of and really watching for.
Excellent. So Jason starts out with 5 points because he talks about whether or not it's important to the cow-calf producer based on how they're marketing those calves. Phillip, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it can be important. I think one of the things we don't really understand, we see it in the feedlot, and Jason's right. I'm not so sure that there's not things that we're doing prior to the feedlot that could be setting those calves up for predisposition to developing a liver abscess. And some of the stuff, the research that we've seen, there seems to be some information pointing toward that transition from a roughage diet to a high-grain diet, so that transition. So if I'm a cow-calf producer and, maybe creep feeding my calf helps set him up better for that transition. Or maybe if I'm preconditioning and what I do preconditioning-wise sets him up better or worse for that transition and can cause different liver abscesses. So if we start to put that together, then there could be some financial implications to the cow-calf producer if we start to understand that better.
Well, and we know anything that affects the price of fed cattle will trickle backwards to the feeder calf price. So you could make an argument that as an industry, it still affects me whether or not I have anything to do about it. Mm-hmm. Depends a little bit on how these form. So I want to ask you guys from your perspective, let's talk about that aspect of how these liver abscesses form. And you got 5 points, Phillip, so you guys are tied. So this answer is important. All right, go ahead, Jason.
Well, typically when we think about liver abscesses, it's primarily due to, some sort of breakdown in the integrity of the rumen wall or the rumen epithelial tissue. Oftentimes we think about it being associated maybe with lower rumen pH if we have a high grain intake or a starch intake into an animal. And over time, if we cause basically a wearing down or an eroding of that rumen epithelial tissue, we can cause an infection. It'll wall off in the liver tissue. So those are the kinds of things I think we typically think about, or at least what we traditionally understand about an abscess and how it's formed and essentially what it is. But we'll see it at harvest time, absolutely.
Yeah, so we see those liver abscesses, and you talked about we'll notice them at harvest, and you gave a great description of how they form. So 8 points for Jason. Phillip, I'm going to ask you, when do those liver abscesses form?
So one thing that we've seen from research-wise is we can ultrasound the liver, and we can see abscesses throughout the feeding period. We've done some projects where we've necropsied mortalities at the feed yards, and we see liver abscesses in those mortalities throughout the feeding period. But when exactly that insult to the rumen happened that caused the liver abscess, that's the part we can't visibly see, and you can't go back in time and find that or figure that out. So that's the difficult part. But as far as when they form, we know we see them throughout the whole feeding period, from early days on feed all the way right up to slaughter.
And to Phillip's point, absolutely, we think about producers, if they're going to be managing those calves and growing them during a typical backgrounding or growing period, depending on what that ration may look like and how those cattle are managed, could very well impact what we might see later on when those cattle get into finishing. From an abscess standpoint, they may develop in that time period.
Absolutely. And I think you guys are spot on that they can be important depending on your production system. It's also important to think about when they occur during that feeding phase and how can I manage for gut health throughout the period. So thanks for your answers. We ended up, Jason had 9, Phillip had 8. So close on this one, but appreciate you joining us. If you have other questions, you can send them in at bci@ksu.edu.
Once again, that was BCI's Ask the Experts. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.